This sitting is resumed. Prior to the suspension for lunch, we were debating the Appropriation Bill 2026. We returned to the Appropriation Bill 2026. Before we commence, I just want to, for public edification and clarification, you might be saying, Minister, the Honourable, the Minister for Foreign Affairs is inside these hallowed chambers. Just for public notice that there was a constitutional amendment bill that became law on the 18th of December 2025, which gives the right of a minister to speak in any place, so that he's authorized, therefore, to speak in this chamber. We revert to Standing Finance Committee.
Yeah, no, yeah.
This Honourable House is now in Standing Finance Committee.
Head 32, Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, in the amount of $80,691,724.
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move permission for myself and my staff to join the estimates in the well of the House.
Permission so granted, Minister. Pedro. Listing. The officer listing. Good afternoon, honorable members of the House. Good afternoon to our esteemed guests or public servants. Let me briefly go through the rules that will govern this debate this section of this debate. Honourable Minister, you would have 10 minutes to give an overview of your ministry. Honourable members will have the opportunity to ask a question and then, if necessary, 3 follow-up questions. Questions based on what the first follow-up questions being based on what the first question was. Asking public servants that before you begin to speak, that you would give your name and your position within the ministry. Honourable members, I will recognize those persons who indicate by the lifting or the standing of your name tag, so to speak, for lack of a better word. I will recognize you in the order in which you catch the eye according to the terms of this Honourable House. Honourable Minister, you may proceed.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and let me say it is an honor to be here to engage this House on the contribution of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade to the government's estimates for 2026-2027 financial year. We are experiencing a structural transition in global affairs. The international order is evolving, and I say that with some caution. It may even be descending into a place that we may not even recognize. But at least we know it is marked by geopolitical fragmentation, supply chain realignment, technological disruption, security-driven trade policy, and the tightening of immigration and migration regimes. These are shifts that are not transient. They define the operating environment in which Barbados must secure its future. The question to be answered is, how does Barbados convert diplomatic capital into measurable economic and developmental returns in an era of geopolitical volatility and fiscal constraint? Our response must neither be reactive nor ideological. It must be strategic. Historians, philosophers, and political scientists alike go to great lengths to determine decisions. That is the defining spirit of a particular era. What is happening? What guides policy? And it is now clear in this current environment that we are living in that it is one marked by profound instability, uncertainty, and existential threats and dangers. And it is equally clear that the most obvious manifestation of this is in the international arena. Hence, Barbados' foreign policy and its operations of this ministry, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, must assume a place of centrality and priority in all the governance arrangements of this country. Furthermore, it is in troubling times like these that it behoves us to go back, we believe, to our basic principles, our basic foundational principles of our foreign policy, and indeed also our domestic policy, to root and orient ourselves. These foundational policies are to be found, as we know, in the inaugural address made to the United Nations General Assembly by the Right Excellent Errol Wharton Barrow, National Hero of Barbados, back then Prime Minister Errol Barrow, in December 1966 on the occasion of Barbados' admission to the United Nations. And in that seminal address, Prime Minister Barrow enunciated as follows, and I quote, "In thus charting our domestic course, we can have no interest in a foreign policy which contradicts national goals. On the contrary, we will support genuine efforts at world peace because we are a society, our society is stable. We will strenuously assist uprooting the vestigial imperialism because our institutions are free. We will press the rapid economic growth of all underdeveloped countries because we are busily engaging in building our own. In fine, our foreign and domestic policies are the obverse and the reverse sides of the same coin. We have devised the kind of foreign policy which is consistent with our national situation, and which is also based on the current realities of international politics. Those were said in unquote. That was said in 1966. It could really be relevant for today's world. Mr. Chairman, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade thus is recalibrating Barbados' foreign policy and foreign trade policy to meet the global realities, while remaining firmly grounded in our enduring principles for respect of international law, commitment to multilateralism, defense of small developing island states, climate justice advocacy, adherence to rules-based orders. Recalibration, however, does not mean abandonment. It means that we execute with discipline. And at the heart of our foreign policy remains the goals and aspirations of all our citizens. Further, it is sanguine in these challenging times for regional solidarity. This is not an option. It is foundational. Our engagement with CARICOM remains at the center of our diplomacy and must always remain. Functional cooperation, trade integration, collective negotiating, and coordinated external engagement, that is our foreign policy, amplifies Barbados' voice and bargaining power in the world. Even as we diversify globally, even as we understand national priorities, CARICOM must be the anchor, a strategic anchor of our foreign policy. Simultaneously, we will continue to work within and strengthen regional and hemispheric organizations such as the Association of Caribbean States and the Organization of American States, OAS. Barbados has long embraced and has aggressively moved to redefine engagements and partnerships with the Global South. It has happened now at a speed with which we should be proud and which the world is actually watching. And much of that has been due, in part, significantly, to the work of our Honourable Prime Minister in the global sphere. We are building alliances now all over the world as we diversify our efforts to build relationships and partnerships that redound to the benefit, not just in the stratosphere of foreign affairs, but to the average citizen in Barbados. Our estimates, therefore, reflect a deliberate revisioning of our strategic relationships with long-standing partners. We will continue to do so. The United Kingdom, the European Union, Canada, the United States. We know who they are. With the United Kingdom and the European Union, we are moving beyond historic frameworks into actually mutually beneficial economic engagements focused on services trade, sustainable finance, regulatory alignment, development cooperation, and investment facilitation. Our engagement with the EU institutions in Brussels and in the WTO in Geneva is being sharpened specifically to give us the advantage to take the opportunities as they present themselves. The global posture of Canada, of course, is evolving under a new Prime Minister, Mark Carney. And Barbados is paying close attention because it is here with our long-standing relationship with Canada that we aim to forge new pathways to progress, to cooperation, and for investment. Indeed, as we speak, Canada has reached out to Barbados to engage negotiations for a new cooperation and development agreement. And we intend to look at that expeditiously. Skills recognition, mobility frameworks, trade, growth, managing migration, and of course, the asylum dynamics. We will seek to move from merely negotiating air services agreements, for example, aggressively move to ensuring that we have connections and that we get planes in the air flying, coming to Barbados and out to Africa, the African continent, building again on that relationship which Prime Minister Motley has been able to establish so excellently with our friends in the African continent. The recalibration, perforce, requires indeed structural overdependence on the North Atlantic partnerships. Whilst we will continue to build with those, once we are organized and we know exactly where we are, we also know that we cannot continue to rely on the North exclusively. We must diversify our relationships, Mr. Chairman. Because as we can see, the volatility, the uncertainty, the capriciousness is a dangerous space to operate in without firm foundations. And so as we have in the cog of the wheel, CARICOM, our national interests, CARICOM, and then our traditional partners on the outer layer, we are going to build spokes of partnerships and relationships to deepen what we are doing. We are therefore modernizing our diplomatic toolkit. We have to change policy, but we have to maintain first principles. We can no longer approach the world as we approached them before. It is changing, and we too must change, not reactively, but proactively. Building new data-driven trade analysis, digital diplomacy platforms, market intelligence systems, diaspora engagement matrix, and a predictive risk monitoring. Not waiting for things to happen, but moving proactively to ensure that when we get reliable intelligence as we do, that we begin to recalibrate and move accordingly. Export promotion, labor mobility negotiations, and reputational management. These will be the new bases for us moving forward. Internally, the ministry is investing in its professionalism and in modernization of the ministry, and we intend to work, of course, with our Ministry of Industry and Information to ensure that we modernize all of our systems and have real data available to us, or I should say, expansive data available to us real time, that we can make comprehensive decisions rather than having to be delayed by paper, by processes, by procedures, which even though we will do those, will have to be expedited. I want to make a final point here, Mr. Chairman, and that is this.
Honourable Minister. Honourable Minister, indeed, the final point.
Yes, final point. I want to make the final point here, and it is that for many years, both in a previous life and now, we have heard about the issue of Team Barbados. And it has worked sporadically in some environments and in some respects. But one of the critical and main things that we want to bring now is to ensure that we institutionalize that relationship. And when we say Team Barbados, all those ministries and departments that impinge on Barbados's external relations, whether it is in tourism, international business and transport, international transport, commerce, trade, agriculture, we want to build a concerted institutional team under the chairmanship of the Prime Minister to be able to ensure that that becomes not an ad hoc convenience, but an institutional reality. And it is to this, Mr. Chairman, that all that I have just said and all that you will hear today is going to be channeled through for us to achieve the objectives set out in this ministry document under our various briefs. As you said, my team is here, and as we introduce them to speak, they will, of course, identify themselves and the departments they represent. I am obliged to you, Mr. Chairman. I beg to move that headstand part.
Thank you. Honourable Member for Christchurch West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And this question, first question, I have three questions for Senior Minister. The first question, of course, I heard you say the world is watching.
Mm-hmm.
The world is watching the hostilities in the Middle East more than anything else right now. And of course, I would imagine that your team would have put together or have a working group to be able to mitigate any expected negatives or unforeseen negatives that would happen because of those hostilities. Now, I wouldn't imagine that you would have that in your estimates, because these estimates have been prepared before. But having said that, what strategy do you have that you may want to share with the people of Barbados? What strategy do you have to mitigate any negatives that you anticipate would be seen from the hostilities going on in the Middle East that the world is watching this time. Clearly, the first thing people would think about is the cost of energy. But of course, there are others. There are logistics matters, there's supply chain, all sorts of other things. And I'm asking, what strategy do you have in place, or what strategy does your ministry have in place to mitigate those negatives that you would anticipate out of the hostilities? We don't know how long they will go on for, but we must anticipate everything and have a plan A, B, and C for it. So that's the first question.
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. You are absolutely correct. Truth is, our very first stop at the station, our very first priority in this entire exercise, as it unfolds, with the high degree of uncertainty that abounds to it, is to ensure that our staff at the mission in the United Arab Emirates, headed by our Ambassador, Her Excellency Anali Bab, and also members of the staff, but equally as well, the wider Barbadian population who are either visiting or resident across the Middle East, are actually safe, are sheltering in place, and are in connection with us. If you would note, the GIS has put out a notice from the ministry, a statement both on the conflict, but also in a consular way to those individuals, and that is our first priority, to ensure the safety of personnel, Barbadians over there, and of course, assets. Now, as this unfolds, we have to see how things go. How long this goes will determine on whether we enter into negotiations once the airspace is open for those who want to be repatriated back to Barbados. My understanding is that there's some movement there. We cannot speak to it now because it still is in its very embryonic stages, but we are working on that specifically. To the broader issue of the impacts now of it, of course, as you said, there are some potentially significant impacts. Our remit really is to gather the necessary intelligence as to what is happening, how it is happening, and when it is likely to begin to seep through to Barbados and, of course, the rest of the Caribbean. In doing so, then, we will build strategic relationships, as I said, on the Team Barbados with the specific ministries here at home domestically to begin to analyze how we respond, how we advise the cabinet and the government to respond to those issues. The early issues are, of course, in energy. We can see that there's movement in the price of oil. I believe the Honourable Senior Minister responsible for energy did speak to this publicly. We know that there are supply chain issues because a significant part of the cargo on commodities and other supplies comes through the Strait of Hormuz. So we know that there will be effects of that coming down. We do not know how significant those will be, but we are beginning to have those conversations. Both papers and other instruments are being prepared to be shared once approved by Cabinet, of course, with the wider government, and then, of course, for those parts which can be notified to the public. We will also be engaging through, again, the Team Barbados and under the chairmanship of the Senior Minister to engage the private sector and other trade unions and others in the society, the wider society, to alert them as to the challenges which may occur and how we can mitigate those. Of course, central to a lot of that, if it becomes as difficult as we could anticipate it would be with a prolongation of the conflict, is of course the Ministry of Finance and how the government then, the administration then responds to assisting Barbadians. But for the moment, monitoring, intelligence gathering, consultation, and of course, a drafting of a first, medium, and a longer-term reaction, depending on how the conflict unfolds.
Thank you, Senior Minister. My second question has to again go with the point that you talked about, diversify relationships, that you mentioned in your preamble. And I'm well aware that
Honourable member, before we proceed, is this a follow-up question? Is
second.
One question and then a follow-up question, not a second question?
Okay.
You do the follow-up question,
diversify
and then you can
relationships
come back later and ask
the
your
other
second question.
Okay. So diversify relationships, you mentioned. and you spoke about your embassy in Dubai, and Her Excellency Anne Libab, and I'm happy to hear that she's safe. However, I know that you've also diversified in other locations as well, and I was wondering what benefits have you seen from those other locations? I know you've diversified in Africa, Ghana, and Kenya, Panama, and so on. What benefits have you seen from having this large diversification of embassies throughout the world?
Our embassy in the Gulf state is actually in Abu Dhabi. So just as a point of correction, I'm there. But thank you for the question, because I think that's a very important question, which I should perhaps properly defer to the Director General to address those issues. But I think in the diversification strategy which the administration has undertaken, the thing that we are trying to do here is not to show how well we can do diplomacy. I think Barbados over the years has shown that we are good at political diplomacy. I think what we want to do, though, is to create strategic relationships for investment, to attract investment, to open up markets. And we are beginning to see those negotiations happen in the area, for example, of the tourism trade, through the negotiation of air services agreements to get flights in and out of Barbados to bring tourists, not just tourists, but also investors who will bring, of course, economic value to the country. The second thing also, on the political end, is to build nodes of collaboration to consolidate our position in strategic areas. And we've been seeing that happening in the area, for example, of climate justice, in the area of resilience building, in the area that's been led by the Prime Minister relative to allowing small and vulnerable states to be able to be treated with differential treatment in trade negotiations, in accessing the international financial system. In fact, the entire architecture we have been doing through Bridgetown Initiative. Many of those countries have endorsed Bridgetown Initiative, and we have seen movements. For example, pause clauses, as we call them, or disaster clauses. Barbados now is the largest issuer of debt with disaster clauses. Many countries did not have them before we acted. A few did. But now, a significant number are on board because of that leadership. So we are not only seeking to get, we are leading from the front. But I will defer to someone who was here a little longer than me on these issues, and I call on Director General Ford to add her piece.
Thank you, Minister. Mr. Chairman, I am Donna Ford, and I am the Director General of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade. If I may, I think that the Minister covered generally the bases of the outcomes which have been seen from our embassies which have been established in Africa in particular. But I think that it's helpful to point out that the establishment of the Ghana embassy has helped to position Barbados within that area where we had not been present before. Traditionally, Barbados's engagement with Africa tended to take place at the United Nations or through our mission in Havana, where most of the countries of the South tend to have embassies. But Barbados's presence within Africa gives us a strategic visibility and an influence which we are now in a position to capitalize on by being firmly implanted in both the jurisdiction in West Africa and also through Kenya in East Africa, where the embassy in East Africa also serves as Barbados's representation to the United Nations established there. Currently, we would also have seen from the news recently the number of cultural activities which have actually taken place in Barbados, which have resulted from the type of collaborations which have taken place through our embassies and the type of engagements that we have been having there. Recently, Barbados hosted a major activity in partnership with the Ministry of Tourism, and which saw several African dignitaries come to Barbados. And we have also seen the one of the direct results of that type of collaboration is the Afro-Exim Bank, through which Barbados has also been able to negotiate a number of economic agreements. So certainly the strategic visibility and the strengthening of Barbados' leadership among small island developing states with a presence in Ghana has been a tangible benefit. Thank you.
Yes, and I might also add, Honourable Member, the issue of skills. As you know, Barbados does have a shortage of some particular strategic skills in nursing and so forth. And we have been able to tap into those relationships to ensure that we can, have access to those skills. Many of them, particularly in nursing, have been already in Barbados, and we continue to do so as well.
And my follow-up question, and actually will be my final one as well. And I did clearly hear you say that one of the remits of your embassies is to look for trade and to develop, apart from skills, trade relationships, and so on. But I looked through your estimates, and I have not seen any suggestion that you would have an embassy in one of the most highly populated areas of our region, Dominican Republic. And I often ask why. Why have we had in Panama? Why have we had in Guyana? Why have we got in Kenya? Why have we got in Cuba? And yet still one of the most highly populated countries in very close proximity to us with opportunities for trade and investment, and we do not have an embassy in the Dominican Republic. So do you have plans to have an embassy in the Dominican Republic? And if not, why not?
Director of Foreign Trade answered that one, and particularly also on the trade side. The Director for Foreign Trade, because I know from my own experience elsewhere that Barbados has been in negotiations for a partial scope agreement with the Dominican Republic on the trade side, but I will let them address that particular issue.
That's Paula. Donna Ford. Minister Duguid, I'm sorry, the Honourable Member, I really cannot say specifically why Barbados has never established an embassy in the Dominican Republic, but I can say that not having had an embassy there has in any way diminished from the type of relationship and the opportunities presented from the Dominican Republic. Dominican Republic is accredited to Barbados through its embassy in Port of Spain. And Dominican Republic is also a member of the CARIFORUM, which is the group of Caribbean countries, CARICOM countries, Dominican Republic and Cuba. And it is within that framework that we have engaged directly Dominican Republic. And that is not to say that maybe in the future, and now that you have raised this question, this gives us an opportunity to study in more detail the feasibility of establishing there. But our engagement with Dominican Republic has not in any way been adversely affected by not having a physical presence there. Thank you.
Thank you. Chairman, Paula Bayer, Director of Foreign Trade. Barbados is party to a CARICOM DR free trade agreement, which is in place. And Barbados trades freely with DR on a number of commodities. It's a wide, comprehensive agreement, and Barbados is in the process of building out that relationship. We meet regularly with the representatives of the embassy in Trinidad, and we're looking forward to further engagements in the future. So there is trade taking place, there is activity between the two sides. And we participate, obviously, also in CARIFORUM, where we engage as one single unit as we interface with the EU and the UK in the CARIFORUM grouping within the OACPS as well. DR and CARICOM work together there, and we operate as one unit. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And so therefore, the message there, Honourable Members, that even though at this time we cannot with any degree of certainty say if or when we will have a mission in Dominican Republic, the engagement continues. And I believe, of course, you know, governments can negotiate agreements. It's the private sector that trades. And so we will be working with our private sector partners to ensure that they take opportunities of these agreements. And there are opportunities to be taken, language barriers notwithstanding, something that we really do have to address. But Dominican Republic is close by, and it is a pretty significant market, as you've said, in terms of its population.
And of course, I will end where I started and say with the hostilities in the Middle East, we have to look to improve and enhance our South-South relationships. And if we have an opportunity at a location that is so close, with such large population and lots of opportunities, I'm just surprised to hear that you're now going to investigate when the Dominican Republic has been there for a very, very long time. In fact, I believe it was the first place that was settled in the Caribbean. But I will leave that aside. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Honourable Member for Christchurch West Central.
Thank you, Chair. Let me first welcome Minister and his team to the well. I have 3 questions, and I know that, Minister, you like to use cricket analogies, and the first question could be a full toss for you, and you can hit it sweetly, truly covers. Minister, the Foreign Ministry, or the ministry that you lead, Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, may be foreign to a lot of Barbadians. A lot of persons really don't understand what your ministry does, the importance of having it, the importance of the ministry to the benefits in their we call it social spaces. They don't understand where is it that your ministry could be seen as one of the most important ministries for this country. I want you to extrapolate, if you may, elucidate, expose the importance of having a Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and to let this country know exactly what you do so that persons in their native spaces could have an appreciation for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Because I know that unless there's an equal gamut of what you do, and in terms of what we do domestically, that we cannot be talking about the sustainable development of livelihoods. And so this question comes from the young entrepreneur in Silver Hill, the car washer in God Hill, the businessman in Warner's Terrace, Vauxhall Gardens. This question is a question that could be exposed by every single man in Barbados. So I give you the opportunity to let us know what our ministry does and the importance of having it as part of our governance framework. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. That may seem like a simple, but it's a very loaded request. Let me put it this way. When I was a young student of politics with the Honourable Member for St. James Central, we were often taught that there were certain characteristics that define a sovereign country. In addition to being able to select your own administration through whatever means, ours is liberal democratic, we have elections. It's the capacity to determine your tax policy. If you surrender your capacity to determine your tax policy, then you cannot be considered to be sovereign. But latterly, not least, but latterly, is your capacity to determine your foreign policy. That is what gives you the right to stand up in the world and say that you are sovereign. And in that foreign policy, even though that particular department is not located in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, is the capacity to defend your borders. It's to defend your borders. That is what gives you the foundational right to declare to the world that you are, in fact, sovereign. And so even though there is a degree of esotericness about foreign policy, and people see it as somewhere where people go travel and do things that they don't understand, and there's cocktails and wine and that kind of thing. And that's that's part of it. I will not essay to say that that doesn't happen. The reality is that foreign policy allows you to build relationships and partnerships that then translate into domestic support throughout your economy. So, for example, on the issue, take for example, we know the issue of climate change, and even that itself sometimes is esoteric for people. But when we have impacts of weather, and people do not appreciate in the global community the fact that we are at the front lines of such debilitating happenings, they often do not make the connection between when our prime minister, or foreign ministers, or ministers of environment and so forth, and economy go to the world and say that we need to be able to have space, fiscal space, room, as the prime minister calls it, elbow room, to do the things that we need to do to build resilience in our country, something which I believe you in your previous capacity understood very well. And when we do this, and we build those partnerships, and we fight those battles, and we get those gains, we are able then to translate that domestically to help the average person, the fisherman, the farmer, the unemployed youth, the business people, the entrepreneurs. Those are the things that happen. I'll give you a classic example. One of the fights in my previous dispensation that I was able to join the Honourable Prime Minister in fighting for is for Barbados to be ungraduated from the World Bank when I was at the World Bank board. That is a fight that we've been fighting for 35 years, I think, almost 30 years at least. And it happened because of a concerted, consistent effort through our foreign policy. And let me state very clearly here that the first diplomat of the country is the Honourable Prime Minister. We, me, Senior Minister of Foreign Affairs, these folks here, we are just envoys. But the first diplomat of the country is the Prime Minister. And she gives a charge. And we were able to work to that. Now, it was done, I believe, in April. I was still at the World Bank board. Would you believe that Beryl happened in May? And because we were ungraduated and put back into the regular borrowing of the IBRD, the World Bank as we call it, Barbados was able to access almost immediately a loan, low-cost concessional loan, to help our fishermen rebuild, to help our business people rebuild, to help rebuild our coast. That is a real and practical example of what foreign policy means to Barbados and to Barbadians. There are many more examples of this. So when we compose our foreign policy, when we speak to Africa, when we speak to Asia, when we do forays, for example, futuristically into India and other parts of Southeast Asia, when we do those things, we are doing them on a daily basis to ensure that we protect the national interests of Barbados. All that you honourable ministers and members of parliament do in your own right, in your ministries, in your departments, on your boards, and so forth and so on, the defense, the opportunity, the advantage that we're trying to gain is entirely to lay a groundwork so that your work can have the greatest level of impact. I can think of no better way to put it than to say, as our right excellent national hero El Barra said it in his address, it is the obverse and reverse of the same coin. What you do reinforces what we do. And therefore, the two should never be separated. People say foreign policy, esoteric, out there, big words, all of that. But it has a grounding. For us, it has a grounding. There's no separation between the two. And that is why we have worked so hard to be able to do so. And I give, of course, great credence to all the previous foreign ministers, and in particular, the Honourable of St. James Central, Senior Minister, then of Foreign Affairs, and of course, Senior Minister Walker previously in their capacities to push this forward along, of course, with the Honourable Prime Minister.
Thank you. And later that response, I want to ask another question. How, therefore, do we shape our foreign policy, whether it's refashion it or however, so that we can have trade and economic prosperity in light of all the things you just spoke about? The geopolitics, the climate change, the pandemics, the disasters that we are having, the threats of war, the reality of war, to ensure Barbados' survival? That's the question. How? I said, how are you going to shape now, in light of all these things, our foreign policy, so that we can be able to buffer the effects of these things?
Thank you very much, Minister. And I'll deflect to the director and let her wax eloquent on that. But let me make the point, and I think it was carried in the presentation which I made. We have to be very strategic in what we do. Look, we're now living in a world where we're hearing about the return of the Monroe Doctrine. For those of us who have had the opportunity to study these things and to come into contact with them, even if casually, we can understand the frightening consequences of what we would term power politics, where might is juxtaposed to be right, and where people are saying to you, not just small countries, big ones like Canada and stuff, you do what I say, or I will smack you with a tariff, or I will do this, or I will cut you off, or I will end your visas. And when we look at these things, we have to really seriously, we use the big word recalibrate. We got to go back to the drawing board and make sure that we not only continue to engage and negotiate and fight for the rights of our citizens in the global space, but we also have to seriously diversify who we deal with. We cannot, as Barbadians, we say, put all our eggs in one basket, because if that basket drops, they will all break. And so the work that we have been doing in this ministry to make those nodes of connection in the East, in Africa, in the South, in Latin America, and so forth and so on, these are to ensure that we buttress ourselves against the saber rattling that is occurring in the global community. We know, however, from historic example, from study, that each of these are phases. They're phases. We will pass through them. What we have to ensure that when we pass through them, that one, we come out intact, and two, we come out with advantage. And that is what we are doing in this ministry and must continue to do. You know, you asked a question previously, which I don't wish to go back to. But you know, one of the most disconcerting things that can happen to a Barbadian is to travel and lose your passport. You then really get to understand, you know, what, you really come to a Christian understanding about what foreign affairs and what the things that we do in external affairs and the relationships we build. You know, you can travel, say, to a very distant part of the world and lose your passport, but if we don't have relations, either directly or through others with those, then you are in serious trouble. And that is why we have to build those relationships. But on the economic side, we cannot continue to feast on ourselves and believe that we will achieve the goals which we have set ourselves economically. We have to diversify. We have to find markets. We have to find partners for investment. We have to drive innovation. We have to include and ensure that the monies which we receive, whether it is monies from state bilaterally, whether it is loans borrowed, whether it is from international financial institutions, redound to the benefit of the average citizen. That is the relationships that we are seeking to build. That is the partnerships that we are seeking to build. That is the trust that we are moving towards to achieve our objectives as a nation.
And lastly, based on what you have said earlier, foreign affairs could be seen as a driver of business. What is being done from your ministry's perspective to ensure that you have the diasporic reach because I believe that that is a big community out there that we can have partnerships as it relates to sustainable development. And I think that your ministry is ripe to have those relationships right now so we can have the business across the globe as we know it. So I just want to know what your ministry is doing.
I will defer to DG Ford.
Thank you. If I were to answer as you framed the question earlier, for the understanding of the person in Warner's Terrace or in Kingsland, I would explain to say that Barbados has bilateral relationships. The relationships that we maintain, for example, with Barbados, Cuba, Barbados, Venezuela, and the multilateral relationships with the international organizations. And I can say that with our bilateral relationships, we have been working to strengthen those relationships, taking our domestic priorities into consideration. In terms of the multilateral relationships, the relationships within the United Nations, within the various international organizations of which we are memberships, Barbados recently, for example, joined the International Energy Association, IRENA, and we have been identifying the organizations which represent for us and in which we can address our priority concerns. And we are hoping that with more direct and strengthened engagement in the organizations, including through membership on committees, committees which have influence, and by assuming leadership roles in these organizations, that we can work to try to secure Barbados's direct interests in a way that they can impact the persons in Warner's Terrace and in Kingsland, Christchurch.
Thank you. I was asking more directly to the diasporic community because I believe that from my brief interactions with persons who live far beyond these shores, there is a level of altruism that exists. And I believe that your ministry is ripe to have that reach out to those communities to be able to give back to this country and help build. And that's where my question was going. Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification. In respect of the diaspora, we do acknowledge that we have strong diaspora communities, and in some of our locations, I would say in the United Kingdom, in Canada, in the United States, where we have had Barbadians established for a long time, the various missions, the consulates, and in the case of the United Kingdom, the High Commission there, we have been doing what we can to try to reach out and to strengthen the engagements. The gathering was a huge success, and not only for the traditional missions, but for example, our mission in Belgium, in Ireland, took the opportunity of the gathering to try to bring more Barbadians into the fold. When the minister spoke earlier, he spoke about the Committee for External, for the country team. And we will have to be working more strenuously with the country team to try to see how much more that we can do, you know, to strengthen those partnerships with our diaspora community. Our previous minister, who is here, he was very focused on having us develop a diaspora policy. And that is something which remains a priority for us going forward. Thank you.
And I think that's, and if I may add to that, I think that's absolutely critical. The truth is that the diaspora is so diverse, and there are people who want to contribute. We really do have to make it a lot easier for people to contribute. There is a feeling in the diaspora, and having myself lived in the community for the last 4 years, You hear it. You hear people saying, I want to do this for Barbados, but it's so difficult. Even things like making donations to the Queen Hospital and to other institutions, people literally cry. We have to, and I'm going to undertake this with some degree of evangelism. We have to really push this and find a way, because the truth is other countries do it. I mean, if you see how the Jamaicans are able to mobilize, we have to be able to do the same thing and to have those reconnections. Now, we, not presaging what may happen, but it has been a discussion for a very long time now, and it will happen soon, I assume, that there is an immigration bill, an updated immigration bill that is going to be coming here. That in itself is going to be transformative in terms of linking second and third generation Barbadians with Barbados and giving them an opportunity to be able to return. Because the same way we did Welcome Stamp with such wonderful success, we should be able to do something similar with our own diaspora and to have them come and make those contributions, because the skills levels are just phenomenal, the things that Barbadians are doing. Some are even on all kinds of magazines in the top 100 and this and that. We have to be able to tap into those skills and get them in here to help us. I know a lot of it has been happening at the level of the Prime Minister, for example, but it has to be an institutionalized thing right down through the system, ministry by ministry by ministry. And the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, of course, being the connector between them.
Honourable Member for St. Joseph.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Senior Minister and your team. You mentioned in your preamble how Barbados has distinguished itself globally in the area of climate diplomacy. Now, through our Prime Minister, our voice has been at the forefront of discussions on loss and damage, debt reform, climate justice, and the protection of small and developing states under international law. In these estimates, however, I want to examine not only the leadership, but measurable outcomes. So under sub-program 97, climate change, small and developing states and law of the sea, the budget estimates for 2026 to 2027 have increased by some $1 million. Can the minister explain or state what specific measurable outcomes or targets will justify this increase? I'm acutely aware that in this sphere, coordination must exist with the Ministry of Finance, and that the gains may not necessarily be diplomatic. Well, they can be diplomatic and strategic rather than financial. But I'm interested to see how these diplomatic engagements can be translated into quantifiable results, whether in the form of climate finance access, debt for climate arrangements, legal protections under the law of the sea. I want to hear some clearly defined milestones that are to be achieved in this fiscal year. That's it.
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. As you may be aware, yes, Barbados has, in fact, and you've indicated that, has been leading on this issue of climate and, of course, on the attendant issues of resilience, climate finance, and those things. There is a cross-sectional, a crossing of interests in relation to that, because it's not only in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, it comes in other areas as well, through the Ministry of Finance, through the Ministry of Economic Affairs, of course, the Ministry of Environment, where we have been leading on those issues. Our goals, and latterly, you may also know that the Most Honourable Ambassador Elizabeth Thompson is currently the chapeau to the Prime Minister, who is chair of the V20. That's the vulnerable, the CFA Vulnerable States 20 group. And in that, we have been making significant strides to bring these issues to the fore not only globally, but also organizing among small, vulnerable states to ensure that we have a place at the table to engage with the international financial institutions first, that is in the financial architecture, but also to engage through the United Nations processes to ensure that we are at the table when these issues are being discussed. One of the challenges is that if you are not at the table, very often the food is shared and eaten when before you get there. One of our goals specifically is to ensure that we provide that leadership so that we get at the table to have this discourse with these institutions, with this architecture, to force change. Why do we need change? Because, for example, on the issue of the loss and damage fund, which Ambassador Thompson, quite incidentally, represented Barbados on up until very recently when leadership changed. In fact, Barbados was one of the founding members of the loss and damage thing. When we were there, we have fought for not only the issue of disaster clauses, which we were able to get through in the end, in many different gradations, but we were able to ensure that at least at a minimum level, not satisfactory, I grant you that one, we got recognition for it, two, we got it institutionalized, and three, we got it funded to some extent. Now, that funding did not reach to the level that we want yet, but it is now in the system. That is a real practical benefit of what we wanted to do. The other thing has been to ensure that fiscal space be given to countries when, for example, disasters strike. You know, one of the things that we were often pushed to do is to have what we call catastrophe bonds. And some Caribbean territories, I know at least one, that did a catastrophe bond. And one of the things that we were able to do through our advocacy, and that we are going to continue to do, is to say that even though that is a relatively good instrument, it was not satisfactory for if a disaster struck. Because the payout, which would have come with a catastrophe bond in its traditional sense, was much lower than if you had done what Barbados was pushing for, which is a disaster clause in your thing to ensure that both principal and interest on a far more significant amount of your national debt was paused so that you can have a thing to stabilize first and then to recover. We now have that. We are now the largest dispersants of debt with debt clauses, with pause clauses in them. That is a practical example of what we also have been able to benefit for. Why? This creates the fiscal space. We've been pushing for longer term concessional financing, not just in terms of interest rates, because most people look at the interest rate. Yes, the yield curve and all that, those technical terms are important. And we all want to know that we can get a concessional finance of 0 interest if we can. That's a grant. But we also know that the tenor is important. And we have been pushing in these institutions under this particular subhead program, as you see here, to ensure that we are able to manifestly get longer tenures. When I say tenures, what we mean, that when you go for a loan, and you say, I get it at 5%, but it's only 10 years, with a moratorium of 2 years to repay, that's nice and cute. But if you're doing major installations like infrastructure, like airports, like highways, big infrastructure projects, you want 20-year money. You want 25-year money. You want 30-year money. And we've been saying to the world, small countries cannot come into the market at those prices and have a loan that when you look around in 10 years, 10, 15 years, time, it is time to repay the money. We need longer tenor, we need lower interest rates, and we need the hidden costs associated, because a lot of people don't know that there are hidden costs associated with loans. And we have been fighting this back with some degree of success. I can tell you that the International Monetary Fund, for example, charged fees on the back end of the interest rates, which would normally, appertain to loans. And through advocacy from our Prime Minister and from us, in the space, we were able to get them to look at those costs and to reduce them. And Barbados' cost was significantly reduced when the IMF took a decision after many years of fighting, and in particular, in the last 2-3 years, through the US Congress Committee on Commerce, through the World Bank Board, through the IMF Board, through the connections that we've made, we were able to get some of those hidden costs reduced for countries in the space. We were also able to get the IMF to agree to a sustainability fund, of which Barbados was one of the first countries to draw down on that fund. Now, that fund has now been dissipated, but at the time when it was done, it was seen as the right thing to do. We fought for it, it was passed, and Barbados was one of the first countries to access very concessional financing, a groundbreaking thing for the IMF, because the IMF really never used to operate in that kind of climate space. And so you can see the tangible benefits. So we want to continue this. This is just a start. We have our objectives to be able to push for additional benefits, as I said, on the longer term financing. We want to do on the fiscal space to create, but we also want to ensure that we have those institutions understand that their debt sustainability analysis, those things that they determine when they will say whether you are a sound economy or not, we want them to understand that things that they need to include or rather exclude from those things are taken on. For example, when we make debt investments in education, in health, in physical infrastructure, that you just can't take that and say, oh, the country has a big debt, and this debt is all that. Look at the benefits 10, 15 years down the road and factor those into your debt sustainability analysis so that the country comes out with a net positive rather than the traditional macroeconomic tools which give you a net negative. So those are the things which we are looking to do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Honourable Member for St. Michael Northwest.
Thank you, Chair. Please permit me to say a blessed good afternoon to the Minister and his team. Given the growing instability across the globe, including the war between Russia and Ukraine, and rising tensions in the Middle East, does the ministry which you presently lead believe that the Caribbean community, known as CARICOM, must now be strengthened in a manner similar to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, particularly in the areas of regional security coordination, economic resilience, food security, and energy independence? That's my first question.
Much, Honourable. That actually is a quite good question. It's a very interesting question. You know, for years, we have, and Barbados has really been a veritable leader in this particular respect. As I said in my opening, we really anchor a lot of what we do around our CARICOM engagement, yeah? And the area of national security is one which I would say, I would make bold to say, let me put it this way, it will be extremely difficult as a small, vulnerable country with open borders to be able to guarantee our citizens the first right of any citizen from its government, which is security. I mean, without security, without safety, you know, you really are spinning top in mud, as they would say. We would be unable to do so if we did not pursue collaborations for our security interests as small countries in this region to be able to combat the dangers which we see coalescing in the levels of transnational crime and criminality, the narco trafficking that we're seeing happening in the region. We know that the Caribbean sits as a veritable entry-exit point for a lot of that activity. We know the impact domestically it can have when it spills over, of course. And therefore, we have been in the forefront of ensuring that we have a regional security system, the RSS, to be able to share information, to share technology, to share intelligence, to be able to allow us to create a consolidated footprint among us. Now, we don't call it a NATO in that sense of the term, but we have our own little NATO here in the Eastern Caribbean. In fact, we have been trying to expand that so that we want other countries to come in for an extended RSS to ensure that we can work together. But even when that does not happen, to have strategic relationships with countries across the Caribbean to ensure that we can protect our borders, we can protect our waters, and we ultimately can protect our people. And that is what we have been doing, and Barbados is going to continue to lead that. We, of course, are the base for the RSS, but it goes beyond that. We then also seek beyond this as a region to build, and you know that some years ago, if my memory serves me correctly, security was added as one of the planks in the pseudo cabinet of CARICOM. So that is how serious we are taking this. We have been fighting as a region and as a country on small arms proliferation. We know what is happening here in Barbados, and it's much worse in other countries as well. We've been doing that. We've been trying to create linkages where we can exchange intelligence on what is happening with groups or gangs, as you want to call them, some of which are cross-border. And so as we define out those realities in the domestic space, we hope to be able to build strategic relationships with countries around us and countries further afield to ensure that we are in a position to respond when things happen, but more importantly, to intervene proactively to prevent things from happening before they come to the stage where we have to respond. And that intelligence has been working. You know, I think the height of that example was in the previous World Cup, where we had all of those pieces of legislation and instruments. I believe Impacts is a legacy organization from that intervention, led again by Barbados. So Barbados has really been in the leadership of this, and we intend to continue to do so because, as I said, the first call on any government, the first right of any citizen is security and safety. And without that, we are really not doing very much else.
Okay, sir. And secondly, in an era of global instability, supply chain disruption, and raising...
Honourable member, is this a follow-up question or is this a second question? It sounds that way to me. One question, 3 follow-up, and then we move on to the next person. That is the process, sir.
Okay, sir, we'll come back.
If it's a follow-up question, you can go ahead. If it's a new question, then we move on to the next person and you get a second bite at the cherry.
It's a follow-up question in relation to the first one. So in an era of global instability, supply chain disruption, and rising freight costs, it is time for the Caribbean community to establish a regional shipping and logistics alliance to reduce our dependence on external freight carriers and protect our economic sovereignty. And why this matters for Barbados as a small island state that rely heavily on imported goods. So like food, fuel, construction materials, and construction costs keep going up all the time, and medicine. So what provisions your ministry have in place to really tackle things like this?
I let the director Director of Foreign Trade respond to that. But again, I think it's setting the course for how we deal with these issues. I really do come back to, and you will hear me perhaps ad infinitum on this issue, that this is really a Team Barbados, that is really a Team Barbados issue. Yes, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we will envisage to have relations and open up avenues through our trade negotiations and so forth and so on with other countries. But the truth is that the exposition of how we manifest our interventions on those issues come through other ministries, if you understand what I'm saying. The Ministry of Commerce, the Ministry of Industry, the Ministry of Agriculture, the Ministry of Tourism. These are the ministries that really take lead. What we do is to try to ensure that they have, as our partner ministries, the avenues through which they can successfully press for the types of things which you have identified. And that, I believe, is our remit. Our remit is not to jump in front of them. Our remit is to ensure that they have the runway to be able to take off into the skies and negotiate those types of things which are now, of course, intelligence relative to trade policy is important. And that is why we said we're going to be data-driven. Because one of the things that we like to do in the Caribbean, and you know, perhaps it's a capacity issue, is that we like to make suppositions on things for which we have no data. And unless we can know who, what, when, where, and how in very accurate and precise terms, quantified down to the last number. Unless we can know that, then it is very difficult to craft strategy. And crafting strategy without appropriate data is always a dangerous thing, because you end up like blind elder. And you know, you may hit, but oftentimes you tend to miss. And our goal is not to be a hit and miss administration. We intend to hit and hit and hit, so that we can deliver on behalf of the people of Barbados. DG of Trade.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Paula Bayer, Director of Trade. I would just add that the Caribbean community has established subcommittees on transportation in reference to your question on the transportation within the region. And a number of studies have been commissioned by the entities, and Barbados has hosted a number of meetings to facilitate the pursuit of regional transportation opportunities. As you know, that's a private sector venture, and there have been many initiatives to try to enhance the options that are before the community for trade. The community, under CSME, we trade with each other free of duty. So the question really is, how can we get more of each other's goods? And at the moment, we're using air cargo, the existing sea trade, and we're encouraging private sector participation through shipping. So that is actively under consideration. Thank you.
And I think I can add to what Ms. Bayer has just said. I mean, she was very, you know, she did not perhaps want to say, but leading on from the work which Senior Minister for St. James Central would have done when he was occupying this post, is that Barbados is currently undergoing a complete trade policy review. Yes, and we are going to be addressing precisely the issues which you have raised in that trade policy review. And I say that because I want to encourage every ministry to participate fulsomely in that trade policy review. And we want the private sector, I know they have been given, some of them have begun to receive their invitations to participate in the consultations, and we are going to be bringing those consultations to the average citizens. You know, we have the Paris Speaks and those types of things, but we are going to find ways in order to connect with ordinary citizens so that they can input into that new trade policy for Barbados. Because, you know, we can negotiate as governments agreements, but it is businesses and people who really trade and do business. And that is what we want to hear. Those are the people we want to hear from, because they must inform how we move forward in terms of our engagements. So, so thank you very much for those questions.
So, Minister, you had mentioned earlier about paving the way for the importation of goods. So I am hoping that within this year that I'll be able to import from Beijing to Barbados before having to go to any other port. Thank you.
Well, we're all wishing for, you know, and that is why, in some ways, what we're doing is so important, because we're diversifying our partners. We don't want to substitute one set of concentrated dependencies for another. And, you know, once we diversify out of our traditional partners in the north, we don't want to become baby reliant on any partners in the east. We want to have all as partners, and we want to be able to weigh options from where we can get the best products at the highest quality at the best prices. And that is very, very important for the average citizen, because supply chain issues are there. We know that. We experience it in COVID. Yeah? Right down to production for us is a difficulty. Because if the inputs, largely 90% of which are imported, and you can't import them, you can't produce. So we have to find ways to ensure, not only domestically that we can rely more on ourselves, but diversify those markets and those sources, and encourage our business people to do as much, because that's very, very important. We speak about cost of living. A lot of our inflation is imported, but there are places in the world that are doing things, producing food, producing items that we need in Barbados that can be sourced at cheaper prices. And whilst it is convenient to do perhaps the obvious thing and go where you are familiar with and where you like and who you know and all those kinds of things, that can come back to bite you. And so we don't want to find ourselves in that position. And that's why we're opening up negotiations with different countries, creating pathways, new trade lines, new air services agreements, trying to get airlift, that is why we're diversifying all of that, because if you manage the risk through diversifying it, at least you're able to make it through when difficulties occur, but more proactively, you can take advantage of the opportunities that exist. And that is where we are at right now.
Okay, sir, thank you.
Honourable Member for St. John.
Thank you, Chair. I have one question for the Minister and his team. Some time ago, I had asked a previous PS to send some correspondence to ministries in relation to what was happening in sports. My question is, I have young athletes, teams, clubs, national teams that are traveling. Is it possible that you can identify either a desk or an officer from within the ministry to deal with some of the issues that would come up from time to time when our athletes and teams are traveling, because it is a major, major problem. Even in relation to having, I can't remember the type of visa from the US Embassy, but then sometimes they're stuck in different countries and it is a struggle to find someone in this ministry to assist. So I'm just asking, my question is, can somebody be identified from within the ministry to be that point person for the Minister of Sports, the Ministry of Sports?
DG answer.
Thank you very much, Minister, for that question. And I will tell you yes. A lot of those issues are dealt with through the consular division, but also through the geographical desk. So once we know and once we can establish communication whenever there's a team traveling, and you can let us know, I will take responsibility for that. And I can work with the desk officer responsible for the area to which they'll be traveling and with the embassy in that particular jurisdiction so that we can provide the best facilitation possible. But it's important for us to have the information. Sometimes we are only aware that a delegation is traveling when they have a problem. So once we know beforehand, we will do the best that we can to smooth things and to ensure that things can go as smoothly as possible. Normally, whether it's the Commonwealth Games, the Carifta Games, whatever sports event you're going to, normally they have liaison teams in place. So once you let us know, we will definitely do the best that we can, once we have the information beforehand.
All right, thank you. I will have my PS send you some correspondence, but it is absolutely critical. I mean, we have indicated to all of the national federations to do exactly what you're saying, to allow foreign affairs to know when they're traveling. But, you know, for some reason or the other, they either don't do it or they forget to do it. But I will have my PS send you some information so that we can forge that tie. Thank you.
Thank you.
Minister, and I agree with you, and I think it is a concept, but I believe given how really volatile things are right now, perhaps we shouldn't leave it to happenstance. A lot of these groups, in order to travel, receive grants from the Ministry of Sports, as they do from the Arts and Sports Fund and elsewhere. Perhaps we should make it mandatory that one of the conditions attached to receiving support should be that you notify the Ministry of Foreign Affairs that a team is traveling and to where, so that we can begin to prepare. And I say that in relation to teams, you know, you raise it in relation to sporting teams, but there are all other types of examples where people are traveling from Barbados. Choirs go to sing overseas. You know, delegations go on all kinds of things, and we don't know. For example, right now, I am sure there are people in the Gulf states, in the Middle East, who have traveled there on business or pleasure, and some of us in the ministry, many of us in the ministry, don't actually know. So we now have to put out a notice saying, could you please contact us and let us know that if you are there or not. I think we take these things for granted. Perhaps we could have done that before, but given the current environment, it is very difficult not to. If you do that at your own peril. And I think that we should know. People don't like other people to be in their business. Oh, I don't want to know that I'm going to Dubai, you know. But you really should you really should at least notify authorities that you are. No, sometimes because of relationships we have with other countries, they will tell us. But it is only when trouble strikes. But certainly for sporting teams, such a large group is going, we need to know, because you can end up having a challenge. Look at the West Indies team. We were unfortunately just knocked out of the World Cup, but our people can't get back here because they're stuck in India and can't travel. So, you know, we now have to look to see, make sure that everything is in place for the Barbadians who are on that team if they're coming back to the region or going elsewhere. So, but we know that ahead of time because they will notify. But I'm saying that it is a good point you've raised, Minister, and one that we are going to ensure that we work with you to find a protocol, find some type of protocol that we can think, particularly for those official visits going, because when you're leaving, a sporting team is going national association, you're already going to represent Barbados. You have on Barbados colors, you're representing the nation. And if you're representing the nation, we need to know, one, that you're going, two, that your arrangements are properly in place, and three, that you're safe. Yeah?
Thank you, Minister. We do insist if we're funding or part funding, but then you have community teams who do their own fundraising and, you know, they just travel. And sometimes they're stuck. So if we can have that in place, I really appreciate it. I look forward to the partnership. I yield back, Chair.
Honourable Member for St. Michael South.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, Minister, Senior Minister and team. And thanks for the conversation so far. I believe this is one of the most important conversations we can have, really. during the course of these estimates because of how the world is now positioned. And my view has always been, Senior Minister, that the budgets really reveal philosophy. When you look at where, especially now in diplomacy, where you choose to spend more, then it tells me that the country is making a choice. And so I was reviewing these estimates and I was asking myself, what is the choice that is being made here? And I saw the two greater increases were in the diaspora unit and in climate. And so for me, what is the question that has been asked and answered in these estimates? Are we suggesting that perhaps Barbados wants to expand its influence, or Barbados is seeking to protect itself as a vulnerable state? Are we seeing ourselves as persons within a geographic space, or are we identifying as a larger global community? There are many questions that came to my mind, but I looked at the estimates and I saw these increases, and I believe that if we turn, PS or Minister, if we turn to the estimates and we look at sub-program 0095, the diaspora unit, this reflects a substantial increase in expenditure. In fact, you've gone from $121,000 or thereabout in your revised estimates 2025 to 2026 to 1.8 million in these estimates. That's an increase of $1.7 million. That is for the diaspora unit. In terms of the climate change, Cities and Law of the Sea section, the sub-program 0097, there has been an increase of about 2-point-something million alone in the operating expenses. And so my question is, what are the specifics really that lead to these increases in both of these areas? Because one would imagine if you're spending more, particularly in diplomacy, that one expects a return on these investments. Are we suggesting a greater, deeper relationship with the diaspora? Are we expecting in our increased expenditure on climate change to find greater grants? How will these things be reported? How will these things be measured? And to what extent, considering that is so important for the ministry, as reflected in the increase in expenditure, to what extent can the country expect returns from these specific expenditures?
I'll let DG Ford answer that, and then I'll come back in at the end.
Yeah, thank you very much, Minister. Well, Minister, in our exchange earlier, we highlighted the importance of the diaspora and the increasing role that they will have to play to strengthen that true partnership between the diaspora as an extended part of our governance and of our foreign policy, the practice of our foreign policy. Increasingly, we would also have seen with some of the activities in the United States targeting immigrant communities. There's the anticipation that the diaspora will need increased support from the embassies and from Barbados. And we have prepared to anticipate some of that support as well. In our missions also, we are strengthening our engagement with the diaspora and establishing particular units to work in that regard. Because traditionally, the diaspora efforts were contained as part of our own consular services. But very often the consular services remit has not been sufficient to address the kind of approach, heightened approach that we are using to engage the diaspora. So that is only a part of one of the reasons why you have seen the budget increase so significantly. In respect of the climate change, you would have noticed that I can give the example of the change in United States foreign policy, and certainly the way the United States has indicated that has cut their membership of certain international organizations. And there has been, I guess we can describe it as an edict that there are certain areas that will not receive any type of support from the United States within international organizations. And the minister is coming directly from the IDB, but there are words which have been struck from their budgets. Words like climate change, diversity. Those are words which, those are areas which have not been receiving the type of support traditionally they have been. And Barbados and countries like Barbados are increasingly going to have to work towards strengthening our own defenses from climate change and climate justice, and strengthening and mitigating for climate justice. We spoke earlier also about the role that Barbados plays within the Climate Vulnerable Forum. Barbados is currently the chair of the Climate Vulnerable Forum for the next year. We've had 2 years, and this is the final of the 2 years. And the budget also covers some of the activities that will be taking place within that particular responsibility as we exercise our Climate Vulnerable Forum responsibilities, including the hosting of a conference here, of a meeting on methane here, a methane abatement here in Barbados, and maybe the Minister of the PS can speak a bit more to that. But that's one of the reasons for the budget, in that as part of our Climate Vulnerable Forum responsibilities, that we will be having to take on a little more expense to execute the responsibilities which accrue to us within that particular remit.
Yes, those are the points that I was going to make at the end, Minister, which I think are critical, because this entire is no longer a debate about climate. For us, it's not a debate. We're not debating anything any longer. We want action. We are on the front lines of the impact of climate, and for us, this is not a conversation any longer. This is really concrete actions, and we want to be able to pry open doors for better quality financing, to be able to ensure that, one, we can do disaster risk management, and two, that is how we plan for events when they inevitably happen and recover from those, and two, to look at the mode and the speed of recovery that we can have. And that's why you will see that budget increase, and the work we are doing with the V20 is absolutely critical, but not just the V20. Huh? There are other modes that we are attacking through the Bridgetown Initiative in the financial institutions themselves, the IDB, the World Bank, to less extent now the IMF, because they've been taken out of the mix by some of our friends. And we want to bring this down now to the granular level, where we can see grants first, concessional loans second, technical assistance, and we've been having these conversations with all the countries. So we're going to be driving that